Inside the mansion, the billionaire stands tall, dressed in a sharp black tuxedo. Guests bow their heads. Servants hurry nervously, afraid to make even the smallest mistake. His every word is law. At the door stands a poor black boy, clutching his worn-out shoes, eyes filled with innocence. He isn't here to beg, only to help, to serve, maybe to be seen. But the billionaire's gaze falls on him like a blade. With a single hand gesture, he shouts, "Get him out of my house. This place is no shelter for the likes of him." The guests laugh, servants smirk. The boy freezes, humiliated, unwanted, as if his very presence is a sin. And just when the doors begin to close on him forever, the camera slowly pans to the grand staircase. There she stands, the billionaire's daughter. Calm, strong. Her eyes lock onto her father's with silent fire. But before he could erase that boy from his mansion, his own daughter would stop him cold. The night was painted with music and laughter. Crystal glasses clinked, golden light shimmered, and the wealthy dancers of the world belonged to them. At the very center of it all stood the billionaire, his chin lifted high, his smile dripping with pride. He was a man who believed money was the only crown worth wearing, and every guest in his hall treated him as if he were royalty. But across the room, hidden in he had wealth. He had power, and he believed the world itself bent at his command. But that night, his arrogance would meet something it had never faced before, the courage of a heart he could not buy. In shadows stood the boy. His shirt was worn, his shoes nearly torn, yet his eyes carried a spark of quiet dignity. He wasn't born into privilege. He wasn't born into comfort. Yet something about him made you look twice. Innocent, hard-working, but painfully out of place in a world that mocked poverty. The billionaire's laughter echoed when his eyes caught the boy again. He raised his glass and mocked loudly enough for all to hear. "Tell me, who let the beggar into my hole?" Guests turned their heads. Servants chuckled under their breath. And then the moment came that pierced the boy's heart like a blade. He was ordered forward, not with kindness but with cruelty. The billionaire smirked as the boy struggled to explain himself. "I only came to help, sir." His voice trembled. "I thought—" But before he could finish, the man cut him off. "Help!" He laughed coldly. "You think this house needs help from the likes of you? Leave. Now." The crowd sided with their king of wealth. Some laughed openly. Others whispered, all of them enjoying the humiliation of a child who only wanted to be useful. The boy's head sank, shame burning his face. He turned to leave, but in that moment, another gaze followed him, not with scorn, but with quiet sympathy. From the edge of the grand staircase, the billionaire's daughter watched it all unfold. Her heart tightened as she saw the tears in the boy's eyes. She had lived in the same mansion her whole life, had seen wealth in its most dazzling form, but in that instant she realized something no one else in the room could see. Her father was powerful, yes, but the courage of that boy, standing alone against ridicule, carried a light none of that gold could ever buy. The days that followed carried the weight of silence. The boy tried to stay away from the mansion, but fate has a strange way of pulling even the weakest back to the place of their pain. A week later, he was called again, this time not as a guest, but as a helper. The mansion was preparing for a grand celebration, and they needed hands to decorate, to polish, to serve. Out of desperation, he agreed. Perhaps, he thought, if he worked hard enough, the billionaire would see that he wasn't useless. He arrived early, his small frame bending under the weight of silver trays and heavy boxes. He swept the marble floors until they shined like glass. He arranged flowers until his fingers ached. 4 hours, he labored without complaint. And for a fleeting moment, a tiny spark of hope lit his chest. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight they would see him not as a burden, but as someone who mattered. But the night was crueler than his dreams. In the middle of the celebration, as music filled the air, a servant shoved a tray into his hands. "Take this to the guests," he ordered harshly. The boy obeyed. His hands trembled as he carried glasses of crystal wine into the hall. But the floor, polished too perfectly, betrayed him. His foot slipped. The tray shook. And before he could steady himself, the glasses shattered across the floor. The hall froze. Every eye turned. The music stopped. For a heartbeat, there was silence. And then, laughter. Cruel, heartless laughter. Guests pointed. Some clapped mockingly. The billionaire's voice cut through it all like thunder. You again! His eyes burned with fury. First you sneak into my house, now you dare ruin my celebration. The boy fell to his knees, frantically trying to pick up the shards, his hands bleeding as glass sliced his skin. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean, but his words drowned in the ocean of laughter around him. The billionaire raised his hand, his face twisted with disgust. Enough! Get out! And this time, never come back. The boy's breath broke, his vision blurred. He wanted to explain, to beg, to fight for just one chance. But there was nothing left to say. The guests were already mocking, the servants already sneering. His heart collapsed beneath the weight of shame. That night, he walked into the cold darkness outside the mansion, alone. And when the world turned its back on him, he cried, not because he had failed, but because no one believed he could ever rise again. The night air was bitter, and the boy's footsteps dragged across the empty street. His hands still carried the sting of glass cuts, his heart still echoing with the laughter that had chased him out of the mansion. He sat down on the edge of the road, head buried in his arms, wishing he could disappear into the darkness. For him, hope was gone. But hope has a way of finding us, even when we stop looking. From the corner of the street, an old man slowly approached. His clothes were worn, his steps heavy, but his eyes carried a wisdom untouched by wealth. He had worked for the mansion once, years ago, sweeping floors and polishing windows no one noticed. He had seen men rise with gold and fall with pride. Now, as he saw the boy trembling in the cold, he stopped and spoke softly. Why do you cry, son? The boy looked up, ashamed. Because I don't belong anywhere. Because no matter what I do, they will always laugh at me. The old man's voice was calm, almost gentle. They laughed at me once too. They laughed because I had nothing. But I learned something in those halls. You don't need their gold to be rich. What you need is strength that no one can take from you. The boy shook his head. But I'm weak. I failed. I'll always fail. The man smiled, not with pity, but with certainty. No, you fail because you thought their approval was your victory. True victory comes when you stop begging to be seen and start proving who you are. Remember this. He leaned closer, his voice firm. You don't win by speaking louder. You win by listening deeper, by learning, by preparing, by being patient until your moment comes. The boy's eyes lifted. For the first time, someone wasn't mocking him. For the first time, someone believed he could be more. The old man stretched out a weathered hand. Come with me. If you're willing to wake, if you're willing to suffer, I will teach you how to turn their laughter into silence. That night became the beginning of something new. Days turned into weeks as the boy followed the old man's guidance. He learned discipline. He learned silence. He learned to steady his trembling hands, to focus his mind, to practice with relentless patience. And when doubt came creeping back, when his heart whispered that he was still nothing, the old man's voice echoed stronger. They don't decide your worth. You do. Every failure became a lesson. Every stumble became a step. And slowly, the boy began to change. Not on the outside, where the world could see, but deep within, where true strength is born. The mornings were no longer the same. Before the sun could rise over the city, the boy was already awake, standing barefoot on the cold ground, repeating the lessons the old man had given him. His body ached, his stomach growled, but he refused to stop. Each day began with silence, then practice, then failure, then trying again. At first, nothing seemed to change. His voice shook when he spoke. His hands trembled when he tried to perform the tasks his mentor gave him. He stumbled, he faltered, he fell. There were nights he collapsed on the floor, tears sliding down his cheeks as he whispered, I can't do this. But every time, the old man's voice cut through the darkness. You can, because strength is not in never falling. It is in rising every single time you do. Slowly, the boy began to notice a difference. His hands no longer trembled. His back stood straighter. The spark in his eyes, once dimmed by humiliation, now glowed brighter with determination. When he failed, he no longer broke. He learned. He grew. Still, the world outside hadn't changed. The billionaire's arrogance remained untouched. Whenever the boy passed by the mansion gates, he could hear the mocking laughter of servants, the cool whispers of guests. "There goes the beggar again," they'd sneer. And sometimes, even from a distance, the billionaire himself would look down from his balcony with disdain, shaking his head as if the boy was nothing but dust beneath his shoes. The words cut deep, but now they did not destroy him. Instead, they fueled him. Each insult became another reason to keep going. Each cruel laugh became another weight to lift in his heart. And behind him, always watching quietly, was the daughter. She never spoke, never revealed her secret support, but her eyes followed him with quiet hope. When no one else believed, she did, and in moments when he wanted to give up, that hidden belief became his strength. Weeks turned to months, and the boy began to win small battles. A broken speech became a clear sentence. A shaky step became a steady stride. A moment of hesitation became a moment of courage. And with each victory, however small, the old man reminded him, "Do you see? The world said you couldn't, but you just did." Still, doubt never left completely. There were nights when he sat by himself, staring at the stars, asking if all of this was worth it. The memory of his humiliation, of laughter echoing through that grand hall, returned like a wound that refused to heal. But then he remembered the old man's words. He remembered the girl's silent eyes. And he whispered to himself, "I will not break again." And so, the boy who once trembled at every word, who once cried in the shadows, continued to rise. Slowly, painfully, but stronger with each passing day. Because sometimes, true transformation doesn't come like a storm. It comes like the morning sun, slow, steady, and unstoppable. The mansion was alive again, brighter and louder than ever before. Golden lights bathed the walls, expensive cars lined the driveway, and the richest of the city gathered inside to celebrate another one of the billionaire's victories. Tonight was meant to be unforgettable. Musicians tuned their instruments, chefs prepared feasts fit for kings, and the grand hall sparkled with arrogance and wealth. But beneath the glitter of chandeliers, a quiet storm was brewing. An announcement spread through the city like fire. The billionaire himself would host a grand performance, where only the finest talent could stand upon his stage. For the guests, it was entertainment. For the servants, it was spectacle. But for one boy, it was destiny. When the boy first heard of it, he froze. His heart pounded, his palms grew cold. That hall, that stage, those were the very places where he had been broken, where his shame had been carved into memory. To return there was unthinkable. Yet the old man's voice reminded him, firm and unshakable, "You have trained for this. You have suffered for this. If you walk away now, you prove them right. But if you step onto that stage, you prove yourself." The boy hesitated, torn between fear and hope. What if he failed again? What if the laughter returned, louder than before? His chest tightened with doubt. But then he remembered her, the daughter. The way her eyes had spoken without words, the way she had silently believed in him when no one else did. He could not let that belief die. And so he decided he would return, not as a servant, not as a beggar, but as someone who deserved to stand where they said he never could. Word spread quickly. Whispers filled the mansion. Some laughed at the thought. That boy? Compete? He'll only embarrass himself again. The servants chuckled. The guests sneered. And when the billionaire himself heard the news, he roared with cruel laughter. That child? Let him come. Let him humiliate himself once more. This time, I'll make sure he never shows his face here again. The night of the event arrived. The grand hall was more dazzling than ever, chandeliers blazing like suns, the air thick with perfume and arrogance. One by one, performers took the stage, dancers, musicians, speakers, all met with polite applause. And then, silence. A hush fell across the hall as the boy stepped forward. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, a smirk twisting his lips. The crowd leaned in, hungry for another failure. Servants exchanged knowing glances, ready to laugh the moment he faltered. The boy walked slowly, each step echoing against the marble floor. His hands trembled, but his eyes no longer carried shame. They carried fire. As he reached the center of the stage, the lights above bathed him in gold. For a moment, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, silence, every eye fixed on him. Every whisper died away. The same hole that once laughed at his tears now waited for his voice. He took a deep breath. His journey had brought him here. This was his moment. The hole was silent. The boy stood alone, the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down on him. His chest rose and fell, his hands clenched at his side. For a brief second, fear tried to take him again. The memory of broken glass, of cruel laughter, of being thrown out echoed inside his mind. But then, he remembered the nights of training, the wisdom of the old man, the quiet strength of the daughter's gaze. And he whispered to himself, "Not this time." The first note rang out. Soft, trembling, fragile. Some guests exchanged smirks, expecting another disaster. But then came the second note, steady, clear, powerful. The boy's voice, or his hands upon the instrument, carried a strength no one had heard from him before. The whole grew still. The sound filled the air, not with noise, but with truth. Every word, every note, every movement carried the weight of his struggle, his humiliation, his pain, and his unbreakable spirit. The billionaire leaned forward in his chair, the smirk fading from his face. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. This was not the trembling servant he had thrown out. This was someone transformed, someone who had walked through fire and come out stronger. The crowd, once restless, now leaned closer, breathless. They had laughed at him, mocked him, crushed him. But now, they were silent, captured by the raw force of what stood before them. The boy's voice grew stronger, his hands surer, his presence commanding. It was as if the whole itself had forgotten to breathe. And then it happened. The same guests who once mocked him, who had cheered at his humiliation, began to feel something they never expected. Shame. Some lowered their eyes, unable to meet his gaze. Others straightened in their seats, as if respect demanded it. Slowly, almost hesitantly, a single clap broke the silence. Then another, until the whole erupted, not in laughter this time, but in thunderous applause. The billionaire's face hardened, his pride shattering with every clap that echoed around him. His daughter stood tall, her eyes shining with pride and defiance. She turned to her father, her voice calm but sharp as steel. "You see, Father, you tried to break him, but you only made him stronger." The boy bowed, not out of fear, not out of servitude, but out of honor. And as he rose, the crowd rose with him, a standing ovation shaking the walls of the mansion. The same hole that once drove him into the darkness now lit up with admiration, the same voices that once mocked him now shouting his name. The billionaire gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. For the first time, his power had failed him. His wealth, his arrogance, his pride, none of it could silence the truth standing before him. And the truth was simple. The boy had won. The applause thundered, echoing like justice across the marble walls. And in that moment, the boy realized he no longer needed their approval. He had already proven who he was. The mansion that once threw him out now bowed to him. And the laughter was gone forever. The ovation roared like a storm, rolling through the grand hall until the very chandeliers seemed to tremble. The boy stood at the center, the golden light shining down on him as if the world itself finally recognized his worth. He was no longer the trembling child who had been thrown out in shame. He was no longer the servant mocked by laughter. He was a victor, standing tall in the very place where he had once been broken. The billionaire tried to rise, his face pale, his pride collapsing under the weight of the moment. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His power, his arrogance, his wealth, none of it could erase what had just happened. The crowd had chosen, and they had chosen the boy. The daughter stepped forward, her chin lifted, her eyes burning with a strength that matched the boy's. She turned to her father, her voice clear enough for all to hear. "You ordered him out. You called him worthless. Tonight, he showed the world that worth is not measured in money, but in courage. And you," she paused, her eyes piercing into him. "You were wrong." Gasps filled the hall. The billionaire's hands trembled as whispers spread among his guests. For years, they had feared him, obeyed him, praised him. But tonight, their eyes no longer looked to him for approval. Tonight, their respect belonged to the boy. The old man, standing quietly at the edge of the hall, lowered his head with a small smile. His teachings, His wisdom had blossomed before his very eyes, and in that thunderous applause, he too was honored. The boy bowed once more, but this time it was not out of duty. It was gratitude to his mentor, to the daughter, and to himself for never giving up. The whole rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, voices united in respect. The same place that had once driven him into the cold now embraced him with warmth. The billionaire, crushed by the truth, sat back in his chair, his empire of pride crumbling. His daughter stood proudly beside the boy, her presence a shield, her voice a sword. Together, they had silenced arrogance with courage. And as the night drew to its close, the voiceover whispered, "If this story touched your heart, share it, because sometimes the smallest voice carries the loudest truth."